Funnily enough, I hadn't had the idea of making this video until my friend Kelsey considered buying a new phone after his old Moto Z died. Hi guys, I'm Ryan Thomas with Failtech, and today I'm going to be putting the Moto Z and Nexus 6P head to head in 2017. So let's get the obvious out of the way. Callum's Moto Z died as the Wi-Fi just plain stopped working after 5 tested different firmwares, meaning that he picked up the 6P. However, not all Zs have this problem, so just be wary about it, but don't worry about it in the sense that you shouldn't buy this phone, because I still think it's an excellent phone. Anyway, with that out of the way, the Nexus 6P came out in September of 2015, and the Moto Z came out in September of 2016, which makes the phones quite different in terms of their age, with the Moto Z being quite a bit newer. They both cost around the same though, but because of some of the differentiating factors, it's not quite as easy as just to pick the newer option. Let's start with one of the biggest differences, the design. The Moto Z is a super thin flat slab of glass with metal rails surrounding. It's incredibly thin with a very large camera bump to, of course, attach your Moto mods if you see fit. Bearing in mind that Kelsey never did buy any because he found them a little bit expensive and possibly gimmicky. He is a student after all. The front is one of the ugliest on any phone in my opinion, because the huge chin and forehead just get in the way, and it's subjective though, because Kelsey thought that it looked quite good, but that front fingerprint scanner can't be used as a button, so the bottom kind of seems pretty pointless. As for the Nexus 6P, well, we have a larger and much chunkier device that feels more weighty and something that I would trust more if I dropped it. It's no Nokia, but it's a darn sight better built than most phones. The thing to watch out for in this design is their easily shatterable top glass rear visor that everyone seems to moan about, which isn't great, but I've never actually had a problem with mine, and I'm sure Kelsey won't have a problem with his. The chamfered edges do feel amazing with the slightly rounded back, and the front has a large chin and forehead, but for a reason this time. This thing has stereo front firing speakers, and they're great at that. I'll get into that a little bit later. So there is kind of a reason to have larger bezels. The screens are similar in spec, with the Z and 6P both running 5.5 and 5.7 inch QHD AMOLED displays respectively, which are really good. I personally prefer the vibrancy of the 6P's slightly larger panel, and the fact that it has stereo front firing speakers makes it an ideal device for content consumption, although IMO just being beaten by the monstrous Nexus 6. Both screens are sharp, bright, and deliver great black levels and contrast ratios, and will be amazing for VR, and maybe even watching films and browsing Facebook. They're all easy to do on these displays. They're some of the best in any phones. The cameras are worlds apart, or at least from my experience. The Moto Z's 13 megapixel f1.8 camera doesn't come close to the 6P's 12 megapixel f2 camera, which sounds counterintuitive, but in reality the 6P is just plain better. Both can shoot UHD video at 30 FPS, and the 6P goes up to 240 if you step down to 720p video. I like having the option for super slow motion, and so for that I would pick the 6P. The low light is significantly better, and I feel like the dynamic range is a little broader as well, so the 6P in my mind just destroys the Z. As for the secondary cameras, we have a 5 megapixel f2.2 camera on the Moto Z with a pretty awesome front flash, which even to this day I feel actually kind of fascinated about, and the Nexus 6P we have an 8 megapixel f2.4 camera that is slightly sharper but not quite as good in low light. Both can shoot 1080p at 30 FPS, which is about average, but I feel the Moto Z takes it here due to having that awesome front flash. Maybe I'm just a child, but it kind of seems cool. Performance is a really tricky topic with these phones, as the Moto Z has a clearly better config of a Snapdragon 820 and 4GB of RAM versus the 6P's 810 and 3GB of RAM, but in reality I just found the 6P to be quicker on stock software. When it comes to the long run though, the Z will last you longer as the CPU is newer, and the extra 33% of RAM will really make a difference. Both will be upgraded to Oreo in the near future supposedly, and both will last you a while yet, so I wouldn't worry. But if we're talking about a marathon rather than a sprint, I would say go with the Moto Z. Both run games and apps perfectly well, and the 6P is just a little bit more stable in my use of the software, but again, put your own software on there and I'm sure it would change. The batteries are rather different in terms of their sizes. We do have a 2600 mAh battery in the Moto Z and a 3450 mAh battery in the 6P, which along with Google's DOS makes the 6P a standby monster and a much better phone in terms of lasting you a full day compared to the Z. I would for sure pick up the 6P for this reason alone. The speaker on the Moto Z is commendable with a mono front firing speaker, but the 6P wipes the floor with the stereo setup and just plain sounds better. And I think it's only beaten by the Nexus 6 in terms of having the best phone speakers. That's just from my previous experience. Both of these phones use Type-C, but the 6P one-ups the Z by allowing you to plug in headphones or speakers without a dongle, so for me, the 6P wins in the ports department. The location of the fingerprint scanners is subjective, as I prefer the rear-mounted 6P unit versus the Moto Z's front-facing setup. Though just to mention, the Z has a scanner on the front, but it's not a button, like I said before. This is really annoying and I wish they would have capacitive buttons up front, but I feel like the 6Ps is also a little bit quicker, but there you go. In conclusion then, the Moto Z may be the better option in terms of longevity due to the fact that it's a generation ahead, but down to pure quality of everything, I'm taking the 6P every day of the week. Well, there you have it. There are my thoughts on the 6P and the Moto Z in 2017. Please do like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, and comment accordingly with your comments below, and subscribe if you're new around here, because it really does help me out, and thank you for all the recent support on the videos, guys. I've been Ryan Thomas with Failtech, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.